Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
We cover a lot of crime in the news, and unless you've served on a jury or you're somehow involved in the criminal justice system, I'd bet a lot of people just lack a clear picture of how it all works.
Yeah, I can certainly think on my own experience the first time going into a courtroom, even though maybe I paid attention in the high school or government classes. There was a lot to learn from just sitting in a courtroom for the first time, from who does what to what it means for a person to be charged with a crime and a lot more. And we're going to talk about that this week with a special guest. We have someone who you may not hear from too often unless you are in her courtroom. Joining us from the 2nd Judicial District or Bernalillo County District Court is the Honorable Judge Cindy Leos. Judge Leos, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I think this will be a really informative conversation. You mentioned your first time in a courtroom. I remember I was a young reporter too, working in Roswell, and it was Dick Niffing who corrected one of my phrases about like a motion hearing versus testimony and all the things. There's so much to learn. But so Chris and I have both seen and witnessed, proceedings in your courtroom before. It's certainly, this one is a more casual environment than the decorum downtown. But let's just give our listeners a chance to learn about you. You were elected on November 8th, 2016 to Division 9 of the 2nd Judicial District Court here in Albuquerque. Then in 2017, you helped create and currently preside over the Young Adult Court program, which we'll definitely chat more about. What else can you share about yourself? What got you into the profession in the first place?
Certainly. So, I'm a New Mexico native. Grew up here in Albuquerque. We moved to the East Mountains when I started high school, graduated from Moriarty High School. I went to school in Colorado for my undergrad in sociology. And it was at that time where I really started to think about devoting my life to public service. I wasn't considering law school at the time. I was really thinking more social work. And after I graduated undergrad, I did some social work with children, and that's when it struck me that maybe I can make more good or serve more good in the community going to law school. So I went to law school to pursue my law degree and also to look at doing some sort of children's rights advocacy, and also have a big interest in animals. And so I was interested in animal rights law, things like that. And it was a little bit of a complicated path before I ultimately ended up on the bench. I was a Child Protective Services attorney for CYFD for a number of years. I worked with the Law Office of the Public Defender as a felony defense attorney, and then in private practice. Ultimately, I realized that I really wanted to continue my work with young people, and that's what drove me to start the Young Adult Court program here in Albuquerque.
Yeah. That's cool. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Young Adult Court program here later. But just to ask you a question about your work as a judge, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions in your role as a judge, or just even about judges in general?
Certainly. So I think nowadays, it's definitely evolving as far as what the misconceptions are about judges. I think currently, at least what I hear a considerable amount, is that judges are either liberal or not liberal. And really, it's every judge, no matter how they vote in any election, has to abide by the law, the Constitution of New Mexico and the Constitution of the United States. So when I won the election in November and was sworn in January of 2017, like every other judge in the country, we have to raise our right hand and swear an oath, and that is to uphold the United States Constitution and the laws of New Mexico and the United States as well. So whether we vote Democrat, Republican, or don't vote at all, our obligations are the same under the law. And I think that that's a misconception nowadays, is that liberal judges do X and conservative judges do Y. And that's not true.
Yeah, and the work that you do specifically is in New Mexico in Bernalillo County's District Court. If you're driving downtown in Albuquerque, you'll notice the 3 main courthouses are all next to each other conveniently when you're having to go cover them. But there's Metro, there's District, and Federal Court. Metro Court mostly deals with misdemeanor cases and first appearances. District Court is where we see those felony cases play out, including some of the more serious crimes like murder, gun crimes. Federal Court, notably, news cameras are not allowed in, but those are federal cases, often serious crimes that would cross state lines, for example, and federal investigators usually handle those. How would you describe to just a layperson those three courts and their main differences?
So I think you highlighted the main differences. So Metropolitan Court is where a felony case will normally start, but not always. Metro Court handles all misdemeanor cases. District Court, where I work, we handle all felony cases, at least criminal. We handle all felony cases. The District Court has a family law division, civil division, children's court, and then, of course, criminal. I'm focused obviously just on criminal. And so every felony, so a felony can be a possession of a controlled substance, drug trafficking, as you highlighted, murder, all the charges that we see that carry more than 18 months incarceration would be considered a felony. Federal court, they focus on violations of federal law. There can sometimes be overlap between district court and federal court, and so we'll see that sometimes, and I think that's been in the news recently as well.
And one of the crimes, actually, I should note that we've been covering a lot too, is DWI, which is a huge issue, but that starts as a misdemeanor, right? Sometimes they'll move to your court.
So it depends on how many prior DWI convictions the individual has had, whether or not it will end up in district court, or whether somebody was seriously injured or killed in the DWI.
I imagine you have judge friends who are in other districts. What is it like to be a judge, though, in Bernalillo County District Court? And I ask that because, at least knowing, just from covering the news here for a number of years, there are a lot of rules that are even applicable to this district. I think of like the case management order that really speed things along. Plus, just the volume of cases is one thing that stand out. But how do you describe like what it's like to be a judge in Bernalillo County District Court?
So Bernalillo County is a little bit unique in the sense that we are divisionalized. So me and other criminal judges, we only do criminal law. Other jurisdictions in New Mexico, they may be general jurisdiction. So they would do civil, domestic relations, CYFD, and then also criminal. So they do all those things. In Albuquerque, in Bernalillo County, and in several other jurisdictions now in New Mexico, they do have, and we do have, a case management rule. It started here, it was piloted here in Bernalillo County when I was still a practitioner. And the reason for that was that cases were, as you highlighted, taking forever to get through the system. And that doesn't serve anybody well. We often think about whose rights are being implicated when a case takes a long time to resolve. And certainly we're talking about a defendant's rights being implicated, their right to a speedy trial, which is a constitutional guarantee. We also have to consider the victim's rights, that they need their cases resolved just as much. The community's rights. We have people who are expecting some sort of closure on cases, resolution. And so having that case management rule, at least in Bernalillo County, when I was a practitioner, there was a lot of resistance because we weren't used to doing things so quickly and we were continuing cases. And the other thing I failed to mention is people oftentimes are spending a considerable amount of time in jail. Now, whether you're worried about the defendant spending time in jail or not, maybe you should be worried about how much it costs to house somebody at MDC for a long period of time, and it's very expensive. And so all those things sort of factored into why we need to make sure we get these cases moved through quickly. So although it was met with resistance, ultimately, we all started to work within the case management rule, and what we're seeing is the lower level felonies are being resolved in less than 6 months, and the higher level murders are being resolved in no more than a year and a half with, some exceptions, but that's what the rule is requiring.
What is your caseload like? Like, how full is your docket from day to day?
So it depends on the day. I'm carrying in the range of about 300 cases, about 280 to 300 cases. I haven't counted recently, but somewhere in that range. And so I'm responsible for that case from beginning to end. And from beginning would be, after it's been arraigned, we schedule it for trial through all the motions practice, which is when one of the lawyers is asking me to do something on the case to make a ruling. There could be discovery disputes all the way through potentially plea or trial, and then sentencing, and then post-sentence relief as well. So if somebody's been convicted and they think that there was an error in their case, they would file a habeas petition. I handle those as well. We handle those as well.
How much work do you end up doing once you leave the courthouse? I imagine that you're thinking about things, sometimes having to research things, depending on how complicated the case is. I mean, is this a job that, you find kind of like, I'm always thinking about what's next here?
Mm-hmm. It's a heavy job. It is stressful, obviously. But a lot of people have stressful jobs. What I think is really makes being a criminal judge very complicated is that you literally have lives that are depending on you to make the right and good decision the best you can under the circumstances. And so that's a heavy burden to carry. And I think, going back to your question about misconceptions about judges, I think that there's a misconception that we don't take our jobs seriously. We know that lives are being impacted every single day by our decisions, for better or worse. And whether it be the defendant or the victim, it could be someone's, family related to the defendant or related to the victim, that all these lives are being impacted by the decisions you make. Nobody here has a crystal ball. And so that pressure of, did I make that right decision given the information that was provided to me to keep our community safe, is something that I think each and every one of us carry around every single day, every waking moment, sometimes even when we're asleep, you're carrying around that weight.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice. The state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on krqe.com or our YouTube channel.
I want to get back to one of the things we talked about. You mentioned the divisional nature of judges and the work you do here in Bernalillo County District Court. And I think this question kind of speaks to that. Obviously, we know that when somebody is accused of a crime and arrested, that happens through usually a law enforcement agency. So in Albuquerque, it's APD, BCSO, New Mexico State Police. Sometimes it's the DA's office, special agents that are doing the arresting work. Some of those cases are prosecuted by officers themselves, but I would say, the majority of criminal cases out there end up going to the district attorney's office for prosecution. So the person accused, they'll get a defense attorney, and when that case plays out, how it plays out, that is your purview very much, from almost the beginning, right after they've been charged and make that first appearance, then it's step by step what happens along the way. If you can tell us about that general process of a case coming before your courtroom, though, is there sort of a pick when, obviously you're going to have new cases that come up every day, but how do judges get assigned and then how does the process lay out from there once you have a case?
It's completely random. So there is a process that's built into the database that cases are assigned randomly amongst the criminal bench here in Albuquerque. And so it can be based on the number of cases that we're carrying, how many cases have been dismissed or disposed of. That will determine that assignment. Of course, the parties have the right to excuse a judge as well. And so after 10 days after arraignment, within that time period, if a party wants to excuse a judge from hearing a case, they don't have to give a reason why. In fact, they don't. They can excuse a judge, and at that point, it'll get reassigned to another judge. Obviously, a judge has the right to recuse as well, and that means they pull themselves off the case. A judge does not have to disclose why. There can be all sorts of reasons why a judge would decide not to hear a case. We have the Judicial Code of Conduct that has some pretty stringent rules, and so that usually is playing into why a judge decides to not hear a case.
I imagine some of that is like conflict of interest. I think Albuquerque is one of the biggest small towns, right? You're always meeting somebody's cousin and... Is that part of it?
That could definitely be part of it. So conflict of interest, I think, is just sort of a broad umbrella. But if you think about all the reasons there could be a conflict, for example, I may recuse off a case because the defendant was a former client of mine. Something like that may pop up. And that may not be something I discover until I see this individual and I say, wow, I recognize him or her. And then I look into it and indeed I did represent him or her. So that might be a reason I would not hear a case.
And one other question, when a case finally does get assigned to you and say it is going to remain yours, depending on what it is, right? You pick a different track of how long the case takes or deadlines along those cases, right?
Correct. So one of the rules that came out of the case management rule is that we have to set cases to go to trial within a certain period of time. And so we sort of set that trial date and then we backdate all the other deadlines, which would include providing discovery, which could be police reports, interviews, photos, surveillance. And then they would also have to conduct interviews of all witnesses, file motions, and then we have our drop dead trial date. So on that date, we're going forward unless it's been a resolution by plea or a dismissal.
And the motions can range from anything.
Anything.
It's pretty incredible when you get to look over the years at different motions that get filed. I mean, you really can raise any idea, I guess, that could affect the case, whether or not it moves forward in the same courtroom at all, with the people that are in the courtroom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a motion to go pro se. For example, a defendant doesn't want his or her attorney. It could be a motion to represent themselves. It could be a motion to suppress evidence. Maybe there's an assertion that the police didn't follow the rules. But you're correct. It could be really anything under the sun. And that's what makes, in my opinion, New Mexico really unique, is that we're kind of creating a lot of new law as we go along. And so seeing these unique issues pop up certainly keeps my life interesting.
Well, and that's where we can see some of the delays, I think, play in, and why cases take so long, because all the puzzle pieces that need to just be in place.
Exactly.
A lot of the criminal cases heard here in district court are ones that do make the news because just by their nature, they're of public interest. And a lot of times, murders, sex crimes, gun crimes, felonies. We've covered a lot of high profile proceedings. We mentioned the Fabian Gonzalez case that you presided over. Chris was live streaming during that time. And I wanted to ask you about that because we have talked about this off camera before. From your view on the bench, what are some of the challenges of having media coverage in a court case? Because, there's obviously widespread public interest. And now that we have the ability to live stream, there's court TV, there's all these ways that people can watch live proceedings in the courtrooms. What are some of the challenges?
Sure. So I think it's amazing that the public has that access to the court proceedings through live coverage, whether it be live streamed or fed back and shown to the public later. I have been a lawyer during a live stream, during a couple high profile cases, and then of course as a judge. And I think that, I don't perceive that there's many challenges per se, as long as, there's respect for the proceeding and for the confidentiality between client and attorney. That's the only complication I've seen come up in the past, is that live streaming things that shouldn't be live streamed. But at the end of the day, our proceedings are open. And so I think it's really important that the public has the access to see what we're doing on a daily basis. I mean, we serve the community. And so I think that's an important aspect. And I honestly appreciate the coverage.
Can you give us an example of maybe a case you provided over with wide public interest? I certainly can think of one, but just to ask you, what was maybe a case that you can think of, and what were the challenges that went with that? How did it go overall?
Certainly. So I can talk about one where I was a lawyer.
Okay.
Where there was, and this was when we were just starting the live streaming process,
I see.
At least from my experience. And it was the Steve Casaus case where I defended Mr. Casaus. As a lawyer and also as a judge, you're really sort of invested in the moment of what you're handling, and trials are very complicated and a lot of things happening at the same time. But I was notified at that time that somebody from the pool of cameras was videoing my computer screen.
Okay, so your notes essentially.
Exactly. And so one of my friends had texted me, hey, you need to close your computer because that's being live streamed. The other complication I think that has come up generally is just sort of comments that are being sort of fed into YouTube or whatever the platform is,
right.
Not by the journalist, but by people who are watching.
Right. And
the concern that I have with that from the judicial perspective is that I don't want that impacting the integrity of the trial. I don't want that impacting a juror in some way. I don't want there being threats or anything that would impact the ultimate verdict. And so I think that could be a challenge on occasion with a live stream.
Yeah. And just to inform the public, when you cover a court case like that, there are very specific rules that we have to follow as media. We can't show the jury ever. That's a big no-no. When you call, attorneys maybe to your bench and you hear that white noise, that's for a reason. We're not supposed to air or hear what is being discussed. And like you said, notes big no-no. A lot of things you have to avoid with the camera lens that the photographer should be very much on alert about when you're in a courtroom. But you mentioned you think it's beneficial, right, for the public just to see what's happening. Why is it beneficial, do you think, for courtroom cases to have a wide audience sometimes?
And I think the perspective on that sometimes too is that when you open the door to such a wide audience, you get people who just don't care about the process and want to just, cause problems, I guess, so to speak. I think there's some of that perspective that, like, if you really are invested, show up at the courtroom and actually, observe the decorum of that room itself instead of just being an internet troll.
100% agree with that. But I think that, back to your question, I think it's, as I said before, we're public servants. We're here to serve the community. And I think most people, fortunately, will never set foot into a courtroom. Most people will never be a criminal defendant or a victim of a crime. And so being able to get an understanding of what it is we do on a daily basis as it is actually happening without being a middleman describing it, just actually getting to see it, I think generates a different level of respect for this branch of the government. I can tell you that without fail, 100% of the jury trials I've done, I go back and I talk to the jury afterwards. How'd you do? You guys doing okay? Because there's an emotional impact even on minor crimes. Each and every one of them had, at the outset, for the most part, dreaded jury service. At the end, found it to be invaluable because they gained an understanding of the importance of this branch of our government. And so I think it plays the same way when someone is able to watch what goes on in a courtroom. It's not what they see on TV. It's probably a lot more boring than what you're seeing as far as a crime TV show, and gaining an understanding of the importance of this work and how important it is to our democracy.
I think that's a good point, because when we're, again, covering a court case or live streaming one, then you get to see all the nuances of each of the motions and the technicalities that go into it, versus if they just watch our reporter cover it at 4 p.m., they're getting a condensed, summarized version because, that's the nature of TV.
Right. I want to talk about a situation here with jury service, but just to give some context ahead of that, there is a high-profile murder trial that we're covering as a newsroom here happening in the 2nd Judicial District Court. To be clear, this is not in your courtroom, so not your case. A different judge is presiding over this, but it's the case of Sylvan Alcachupas, who is accused of shooting and killing the owner of a pizzeria shop in Albuquerque, Rosario Zito, who owned Giovanni's Pizzeria. He was killed, and the accusation is that the man Alcachupas is charged with killing him after trying to rob him outside the restaurant 3 years ago. So obviously a high-profile case because of the nature of what happened here. The trial was just slated to begin here in January, but it didn't. The jury was seated. Witnesses and attorneys were apparently ready. Then on the day of opening statements, when those were supposed to take place, the judge declared a mistrial before it even began. So a special prosecutor for the DA's office told us here at News 13, quote, "An issue that morning arose with a juror, so that juror could no longer serve. So we did not have the required 12 jurors that we needed for the trial to continue," end quote. So we should note that case is still slated to happen, but there will be a new jury that has to be seated. The judge in the case did not elaborate. And we, again, know this is not your case. You can't talk about specifics, but I do want to ask in general, how hard is it to get everyone ready for a trial, especially in a high-profile one? How hard is it seating a jury, calling witnesses, getting all the parties ready for, say, a big murder trial? Is it a lot of planning and legwork?
It's a tremendous amount of work, and it is not just the judge. It is the entire courthouse. We have many people who are integral into making sure a trial moves forward. So we have the jury division. Jury division does a tremendous amount of work, summoning the jurors, answering their questions, getting them all at the right place at the right time, arranging for interpreters. We have interpreters that maybe needed multiple different languages. So we have an interpreter division who consists of one person who does all this work. We have our trial court administrative assistants, our bailiffs, our clerks, all these people who contribute to making sure a trial can even get started. Now, as far as the work that goes into it as a lawyer, it's a ton of work that lawyers have to do on small cases, even big cases. I mean, even more so on big cases. So, and then as a judge, you're sort of the, you're controlling the proceedings, you're controlling all the pretrial litigation, you're making sure that everybody's doing the job that they need to do so that we can move forward. When you have a mistrial like this, it's very, very unfortunate because a lot of resources have been poured into getting that trial to move forward. And there's a lot of disappointment, I'm sure, for the next of kin and other people that were expecting a resolution on this, and the defendant and his family. So the problem is that, making sure that we have enough jurors that are willing to commit to any trial, and then a longer trial, it can sometimes be difficult. People have other things going on in their lives, or they get sick, or they have, they recognize a witness. All kinds of things can contribute to why a juror can no longer serve. And if they didn't have enough alternates and they lost one, then in all likelihood, there was no option.
That's a tough blow because, like you said, so much planning. I imagine it's emotional toll right on the families as well to go through that whole process. This was 3 years ago, but it's just, a lot of families that we've interviewed over the years talk to us about just how emotional it is to be in court for something like that.
Definitely.
And it can be over in a second.
Yep. Just the build up to it, the anxiety going into it. And then for it just to say, well, we got to do this another day. Yeah. And unfortunately, it happens more than we'd like.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hey guys, Chad Brummett here with New Mexico Frontiers, the KRQE original series that focuses on tech and innovation happening right here in New Mexico. We've got a lot of great stories about various businesses, technology, and of course, space exploration. So make sure that you follow us on air at KRQE and Fox New Mexico, as well as our KRQE YouTube channel online. In the meantime, let's get back to the New Mexico News Insiders.
Going to get through that trial successfully, because I certainly know that you've probably been in that position where it's like all the stakes are in play, and getting to the outcome. I mean, what is that's got to be a relief as a judge to finally say, we did what we were supposed to do here.
It is. It definitely is. But there's still, the way it works in our judicial system is that as a judge, you could definitely be making some mistakes during trial. Because as judges, trial judges, we have to make on-the-spot decisions about mainly evidentiary things, but other things pop up. When you hear a lawyer say objection, hearsay, objection, whatever they're objecting to, the trial judge has to make a decision very quickly on the spot. And believe it or not, we're often wrong. And when we're wrong, if a defendant is convicted in criminal court, they have the right to appeal. And the Court of Appeals will then, or the Supreme Court will make a decision whether you were right or wrong. So even though the case may have come to a verdict, we oftentimes are thinking, like going back to your initial question, do you carry it with you at night, weekends, things like this? Certainly, you're thinking about, did I make the right decision on this, that, or the other? Is that conviction going to be overturned? If the conviction is overturned, we start all over again. Wow. Oh, so even though you have the verdict, if you made a mistake at trial, we start again.
Yeah, because then there is a transcript of the entire proceeding. And so the body of work you did across those hours, days of trial can be scrutinized into perpetuity, essentially.
Exactly.
Wow.
A lot of pressure. Yeah. I want to shift to a topic, though, we know you're passionate about. This is specifically diversion courts, like the young adult court program that you preside over. First, tell us, what are diversion courts and what makes them different from the general criminal court proceeding?
Yeah, so in Bernalillo County in District Court, we have a DWI court. We have young adult court, which is my specialty court, which I'll spend some time on. We have a drug court program for adults. And a mental health court program. And so when we think about diversion programs and diversion court, it's a different way to handle a criminal case and a criminal defendant that goes beyond the traditional plea, sentence, probation, Department of Corrections, jail. It's a more holistic way of addressing the root causes of crime. I think oftentimes we're trying to figure out a quick fix to what's going on in our community or in our country. It's not a quick fix. We have a lot of problems, and frequently it's related to trauma. Definitely it's related to substance abuse and mental health issues. And so diversion programs are aimed to get to the root of the problem that's causing and driving the crime in our community.
Which is something we hear a lot of people want, right? When we hear, politicians or even, public advocates upset about like the homelessness issue or mental health or substance abuse. It's like, I think a lot of people agree. Can we, they want to get to those root causes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So young adult court, this is something that we know you've got quite a stake in here. Who qualifies for young adult court? And once they're in the program, what options are available to them that they wouldn't otherwise get necessarily in the traditional court?
So young adult court is available to any young person between the ages of 18 and 25 with felony charges pending in Bernalillo County. So they have to be 18 to 25 at the time of the offense. And young adult court, we developed it in early 2017, and it's an intense program. It's definitely harder than probation, and contrary to many people's belief, it's harder than prison too. And so it can take anywhere between 18 and 24 months. Sometimes we have people that have taken 4 years to get through the program. And our perspective is, as long as you're showing up to the program, we're going to continue to help you, especially with fentanyl being one of the main problems. So it really is taking the individual, the young person in our community that may be really responsible for a lot of the criminal behavior that we're seeing, and putting them into an intensive program that requires therapy for any sort of trauma, substance abuse, mental health. We have UAs, so they have to provide random testing frequently, at least 3 times a week when they get started. We have weekly court appearances every single Friday, even through COVID. We were doing it. We have court appearances every Friday where the young person will have anywhere between 20 and 30 young people in person, and the rest of them on Zoom. We have 100 people in our program. They're required to be there and talk to me and Judge Montano, who also presides over young adult court, about what's been going well, what they can use some support with. And we really pride ourselves in thinking outside the box. And even though we're 100 participants deep, we treat each participant as a unique individual with their own unique set of issues, and let them advocate for, things that are going to help them. We have a gun violence prevention aspect, so we have a whole track related to gun violence. We have, as I stated, the fentanyl. We help people navigate some of the CYFD concerns they may be having. We are open to all and every new suggestion for the participant that comes in front of us, so that at the end of the day, what's the resolution? If they complete young adult court, they're walking away with not being a felon, so their cases are dismissed.
I want to ask you about that point, because I do think some people tend to hear that and they think, well, they're just getting away with it. Mm-hmm. And what would your response be? Because I hear what you're saying, though, is how intensive that is. Compared to what may be the regular court, they could just take a plea and get sent to a building where, they're behind a locked door and fed each day and not really have to be told to do something. So I guess just pushing that question back to you, some people hear about these courts and say, this is just easy, you're letting them off the hook. Yeah. And why would you say that's not the case? So
there's a misconception that it's and I've heard this, hug a thug, right?
Right.
That we're just sort of giving them a slap on the wrist, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So I think there's a misconception that when people go to prison, they're going to come out better, rehabilitated. And certainly there are many people who do come out of prison and they're able to be law-abiding. But as a broader perspective, when you're felonizing somebody, when they become a felon, so many doors have closed. And because doors have closed, whether that be for suitable housing for them to raise their family, getting a good job, all the sort of things that we often take for granted, those doors are closing for them. They're left with very little options to survive, which leads to further criminal behavior. So we're talking about recidivism. And that word recidivism means, are you breaking the law again? After you've served your time, are you going to break the law again? So young adult court, we're helping people who have high risk, high needs. So these are the individuals who are likely to recidivate. They're likely to pick up new charges, whether they be low level or very high level murders. And we are integrating them into the community, getting them their education, their treatment, addressing the root cause of what led them to the criminal justice system so they do not recidivate. So people think a consequence of making somebody a felon teaches them a lesson. it really is kind of the opposite. I'm invested in this community. This is where I love Albuquerque. I love New Mexico. I do not want to, cause there to be further crime or problems in our community. What I want is a thriving community where we're supporting our young people who need some help, getting through some challenges in their life. So I can understand that perspective, but I think it's based on an inaccurate foundation.
Yeah. You mentioned fentanyl being such a problem, especially for young people. I imagine you see that play out in your courtroom in different ways. Do you have any success stories that you can share with us from young adult court?
We have so many success stories.
If you could pick one to share, yeah.
Certainly. So we've had multiple people that have come in very, very addicted to all sorts of things. One of our graduates, I'll just call him Michael. He was in movie theater ads. He was on the billboards for the Keep NM Alive campaign. He was a young man who struggled for very, very, very long period of time. And Young Adult Court has numerous grants that can help pay for treatment. And these grants helped Michael get into treatment over and over and over again until he finally, a light turned on for him. And I hear a lot of our participants and our graduates describe that like a light switch going on, where all of a sudden they have a different future in mind. We hear frequently our young adult court participants think that they had two options in their future, prison or the graveyard. And we hear that all the time. And for the first time in their lives, they're being offered hope that there is a third option, and that is having a law-abiding, happy life where they can contribute to our community and they're not dead or in prison. And so Michael is living proof of one of those people. He's got a job, he's healthy, he rides in a rodeo, he's expecting a baby, he's getting married. We just heard from him last week. He comes to young adult court all the time just to say hi. And so he's not a solitary example. We have many people who society and our community may have felt he's best beyond in prison, behind bars, where in reality, with just a little bit of an investment, he's come out on the other side of this much stronger for himself and our community.
Wow.
Interesting. What do you think? Obviously, I think you've explained why you think these are so important. Why do you think that perhaps we're not doing more of them? Is it a money thing? Is there room for more of this, you feel?
I think it's probably both, and there's probably other issues as well. Oftentimes we talk about resources, and I'm sort of getting on my soapbox here about resources. It's too broad a word when we talk about resources. What we really need is to be specific on what our community needs to get ahead of this. And so, Young Adult Court started in 2017. We had 2 people, and we didn't have a lot of buy-in. We had a lot of people saying, no, we're not taking these individuals in who have these really high needs. But with perseverance and me just sort of honestly taking the risk and being willing to stick my neck out to say, no, I believe in this and I believe this is going to work. We've built it up to 100 people. So, I think, could we use more money? Could we use more people to do it? Absolutely. But I think community buy-in is what we need more than anything. And if people, come and see what Young Adult Court can achieve, and they actually see it firsthand, like talking about live streaming trials and things like that, actually seeing firsthand someone's story, where they come from. We have young people that come up and they present and they say, when I was 10, this is just an example. When I was 10, my mom was murdered in front of me, and I started to live on the street when I was 11. And the only time I ate was when I had school. I mean, that's the perspective of a lot of young people in our community. And somehow we expect that they're going to succeed without help, without intervention. They're not. I mean, that's a lot. And that's not it. That's not an isolated story. That is the experience of many young people in our community, something similar to that.
And I think the resources, to hit on that word, I know you take issue, just to be specific though, in order for Young Adult Court to happen, you have federal grant money, right?
Correct.
And I imagine local partnerships with private providers.
Correct.
Yeah. Housing, I imagine, is probably part of that.
Housing is a big deal. Housing is one of the biggest issues. But we have, so just to give you the framework of who's on our young adult court team.
Yeah.
So we have the public defenders. We have attorneys from the public defender. We have attorneys from the district attorney's office. We have treatment providers. We have multiple treatment providers we work with. The main one that comes to every single staffing is Duke City, right down the street on First Street in Lomas. So we have all the therapists participating in that. YDI. We have SAC. We have the young adult program that's through the county as well, who provides housing and also treatment. We collaborate with all the drug treatment centers around the state of New Mexico, and we are not against sending somebody out of state if that's what they need. And so with our funding and with the buy-in that we've been getting from a lot of the people in the community, we're successful. Yeah.
Okay. And it seems like when you talk about community buy-in, you kind of need more of that to keep growing. When we talk about young people being involved in criminal activity, it's something we hear a lot, especially lately. It's more prevalent these days, it seems. We often hear political messaging, for instance, like we need tougher penalties or tougher laws. And as a judge who's seen firsthand young people make mistakes, get criminally charged, serve jail time, what do you say to people who have that belief that, harsh penalties will make an impact as a crime? Do you see it as a crime deterrent for young people, or in general, do you see more success coming from like these specialty courts?
So from my perspective, I think the success comes from somebody believing in you. When we have a young person who has gone through a good portion of their life with no one really believing that they're headed anywhere but, like I said before the graveyard or prison, for a judge or one of our young adult court officers with pretrial services to say, no, I know you can do this. A DA to get up and say, you've been sober 100 days. I'm so proud of you. Instilling in that person hope and that somebody has faith in them is effective. It is much more effective than locking them up. Now, going back to your point of whether harsher penalties will be a deterrent, I can't speak for everybody. It may be a deterrent for many, many people. But I can tell you from my conversations with the hundreds of young people I've interacted with in this program, that's not what the deterrent is, because they think that's their future regardless. So a deterrent and a way to avoid recidivism is to sit down with a person and say, what do you need? I believe in you. You can do this. Congratulations on your baby, congratulations on a new house, that sort of thing that a lot of us who come from a more privileged background expect, and the way we're raising our children, that's not true for a lot of people. And so they don't have that faith in themselves. So we give them that faith.
That's awesome.
Well, that's a very interesting program, and we're glad to hear a lot more about it. Is there anything else that we're missing that you would like to add or you hope people better understand?
It's a big question, and I probably could talk your ear off for that. I think that at the end of the day, we can all use a little bit of hope that we do have a good future ahead of us. We just need to have faith in each other and listen more and come to my young adult court anytime. I know Ms. Burkhart's going to be coming on
week.
Friday and see the hard work that we're doing and see the hard work that our participants are doing. They don't get to graduate by going through the motions. So, it's something I'm very proud of, and I appreciate the opportunity of being able to speak about it and educate the community on the hard work we're doing at district court.
Yeah, we don't often get to hear from people behind the bench, so we really appreciate you being so candid and open to coming on our show, Judge Leos. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to the Honorable Judge Cindy Leos for coming on our show and really breaking down, peeling back the curtain of what it means to be a judge in Albuquerque, which is fascinating. And I'm really excited. Ann Perrette and I are going to go witness young adult court soon in her courtroom.
Yeah, certainly. They have a lot of work. She was saying about 300 cases, and that includes just a wide variety of crimes and also age groups, from what she's saying, the folks in young adult court to the other grown adults here. And all of it takes the nuance of each individual case having its own different facts, and just a lot of work that they do.
Yeah, the 300 cases, I think, were the ones that just she handles.
Yes.
And so there's
yes.
even more than that if you consider all of district court.
Correct.
There's a lot going on in Albuquerque, folks. Well, if you have any story ideas or just people you'd like to hear from, keep those tips coming. Chris and I are reading all of your messages on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all the platforms. Feel free and reach out. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media.
At Chris McKee TV is where I'm at. Also Chris.McKee@krqe.com. Thanks for watching and listening.